Hi everyone, I am Alexander Rigby, the executive editor of Baking Across America, and I'm so excited to be here in conversation today with my author, B. Dylan Hollis, with his second vintage cookbook. Hey Dylan, how's it going?
I'm doing very well today, Alexander, and yourself.
What are you making in the kitchen?
I figured while we talk, I'm going to be making a recipe from Baking Across America called Mojave Nuggets, which is includes one of my favorite ingredients of dates. Whenever I think of California, whenever I think of the desert, I think of dates. And the Mojave Nuggets are a type of date roll, which don't look very appealing as I'm making them. But, we're in the process currently. It looks a little bit like an Italian sausage. It's mainly constituted just of dates and almonds. And currently I'm just rolling them after I've added some honey.
Super excited to be talking to you today about the creation of Baking Across America and all things baking vintage recipes. I think maybe it'd be fun just to hear a little bit more from you about how you got into baking vintage recipes and what really turned you on to scouring through these old cookbooks and finding these incredible, sometimes weird, sometimes wacky, sometimes wonderful recipes to share with your followers online.
TikTok was just coming about, and I had always been a lover of things from yesteryear. I had collected old books, old records. I drive a 1963 Cadillac, which is on the cover of this second book. I began scouring through all of my collections of old things, and I found an old cookbook, an old 1950s Five Roses Flour cookbook, which is a Canadian flour company. And I was looking for video ideas to do on TikTok. And as I was turning through these pages, there was a recipe for pork cake. Pork cake? It's a fruit cake, but it had a pound of ground pork in the ingredients list. And I said, there's no way. This is 100 years old, 105 years old. I need to try and make this and see what were people thinking back then. And I decided to bake it on camera, and I recorded that as a TikTok in August of 2020.
Pork cake feels illegal. Finger the pork and batter. You've got the wrong man.
Good.
I need therapy.
Oh boy. And that's how it all started. And before long, fans were sending in these old cookbooks that you had mentioned to my post office box, and I was baking them, recording them, uploading it, and it was just a storm.
So Dylan, I would love to hear a little bit more about the making of Baking Across America, and I think it'd be interesting maybe to start with how the concept of Baking Across America first came together.
It began on TikTok. We just talked about all of those recipes that I would upload, and I would bake my way through these old cookbooks. And I would get lots of comments, oh, I remember this, my mom used to make this, my grandma used to make that. But every now and then, I would hit a recipe that was the favorite of a given state or city. People got really fired up. It was like a hero of their state. This is the pride of my city. Everyone here, knows it and loves it, and they have their favorite, their favorite bakery from where to get it. And it was immense, the amount of comments and pride for a dessert. Not to mention travelogues, traveling about, seeing what every state has to offer. They're very unique in the United States. People say, it's just one country, but it's a bit like having 50 odd countries within a country. I like cookbooks that are organized different from just appetizers and salads and desserts and, side courses. I like to go through lists. I like to go through a little bit of a journey. Maybe it's because I read through my cookbooks, my old vintage cookbooks, like novels, every night before bed. I go through and read them. So if I structured a cookbook like that, I feel it would be a lot more engaging, and perhaps it would appeal to those who aren't necessarily bakers. So, and then you, of course, agreed that it would be a good idea. You sort of had that idea floating in the back of your head as well, didn't you?
I love anything regional or dealing with geography, especially with our book. We ended up being able to hire the fabulous illustrator Brandon Campbell, who created some really great mid-century modern style maps. So each of the regions opens with a custom map that was illustrated by Brandon that turned out so well. So any excuse to create a map, I think, is a good one. What were some of the easiest states to pick recipes for? And likewise, what were some of the hardest states? I would love to hear that. And then also, if you're willing to share what some of your favorite recipes are in baking across America.
So one of my favorite recipes here, because I discovered dates in that desert, is Mojave Nuggets, which is one of our entries for California. Now, Boston cream pie from Massachusetts, that was easy. Down in Florida, everyone knows of the key lime pie. That was very easy. But then you go to a state like Wyoming. Now there's a hard state. I had to think outside the box. I've been in Wyoming since 2014. We have these terrible little bushes called choke cherries, and they produce the choke cherry, which is a very small, awful pit-to-flesh ratio fruit that is, like its name, very tart. It's astringent. It's poisonous to dogs. You really can't do much with it. But the hard ranchers and, homesteaders out here have long canned them. So they would make a jam or a jelly out of choke cherries. And you go to any Wyomingite's kitchen, any Wyomingite who's an old timer, and you'll just find rows of choke cherry jam from years prior. So I said, that would be really interesting to find a recipe or workshop a recipe to offer a baked good that utilizes that jam.
And one of the things that we were super lucky to be able to do last summer in making Baking Across America is that you actually got to travel to nearly half of the states across the country. I think we ended up being in 18 or 20 different states. It was somewhere around there. I'm curious if you'd be willing to just share with the audience a little bit about that trip and how we brought it all together and what some of your favorite highlights and memories are from actually baking across America in real life.
It was madness. To take the cookbook out of the studio and to put it on the road, that's almost unthinkable because you can't really do redos. We had a baking assistant, which was just, my friend from college, Kaylee Stalder, who's a great baker. And you don't have a fancy food stylist. You can't so much control the light. You can't so much control the temperature. You can't really take breaks. You're outdoors a lot of the time. We shot, Baking Across America. We made all of the dishes on the road. We would land and we would stay in Airbnbs, and we would have to go to the grocery store and get the lists for all of the ingredients. Hope Airbnb would have all of the the mixers and the right ovens or ovens that worked. And that was scary from the outset. Could we make it work? But we did. And it was really exciting to be able to carry, for example, the Boston cream pie. And we did. We carried it through the streets of Boston. And we placed it on and near the Boston Freedom Trail markers. We were carrying it through the Parker House. One of my favorite moments, we were photographing the Boston cream pie. And one of the tour buses in Boston stopped by, and the tour guide on his mic said, "Are you B. Dylan Hollis?" And I had to look up on the street, as we were trying to photograph this thing. And I said, "Yes. Why, yes, I am." He's like, "Is that a Boston cream pie?" I said, "Sure is."
I'm curious if there were any places that surprised you, or again, maybe there was something memorable that happened.
But some of the places that really surprised me, I had never traveled to New Orleans, Louisiana before. And I had done, so much research and recipe testing. And I have a first edition Picayune Creole cookbook from 1900 that was sent to me by a kindly fan. And so I was doing all of my research and recipe testing and learning as much as I could about New Orleans before I got there. But nothing could prepare me for New Orleans, Louisiana. It felt like a place outside of time. It felt almost like you weren't in America anymore. New Orleans' food is what surprised me. I had turtle soup for the first time, which was marvelous. We learned the history of calasse, which is a recipe in Baking Across America, which is a little known sort of breakfast fried fritter from New Orleans, made primarily of rice. We learned all about the history of that there. We walked up and down and taste tested all of the pralines from all of the different praline stores. It was fun. New Orleans really surprised me.
Something else that's really exciting about Baking Across America is that we are actually going to have an audiobook version narrated by B. Dylan Hollis himself. And what I think special about this audiobook is that it's going to be Dylan sharing with you all of the incredible history about the recipes themselves. So, Dylan, I'd love to just hear a little bit more about what it was like to record the audiobook and why we decided to create an audiobook.
I wrote too much. I mean, you're my editor. You saw how much I wrote. The audiobook was really fun to record, but it was really fun to offer people, again, who may not be bakers, who may not be proficient in the kitchen, to hear the history, why people love these things, how they came about, of the recipes for each state, and go on this Baking Across America road trip, but without having to get, the kitchen all hot by turning on their oven, or get their hands all wet and sticky like my hands are right now. Speaking of, we've rolled down our Mojave nuggets to the correct sort of width, and I'm just going to cut them in little increments before putting some coconut around the sides.
Comparing and contrasting Baking Yesteryear and Baking Across America, if you were to explain the two books to someone who maybe isn't familiar with you, or it could be to one of your fans, how would you describe them?
If Baking Yesteryear is a time machine, I would say that Baking Across America is a road trip. And that's in the subtitle, a vintage recipe road trip. And you see the sights and you learn the stories. And I think it parallels what makes America really fun, which is the ability to pick any direction, travel through, stop for a little bit, learn something, try baked good, and then be on your merry way. And I had a great deal of fun tasting and seeing America through the lens of sugar and flour and eggies. Yes, and let me show you here. I've cut them. I've cut them into little. My hands look awful. I've cut them into little nuggets, and then we coat them in desiccated coconut. And that's another thing. If we're talking beyond the book, when you're talking cookbooks and writing recipes and making recipes replicable to people baking them, desiccated coconut is not something you hear a lot of. Have you ever heard of it, Alexander, aside from my cookbook?
I think it maybe was the first time, with you.
Well, it's a very dusty, thinly chopped up coconut, and it's necessary for a lot of the old school confections and desserts like this one right here. I've called these Mojave nuggets, but when you're down in California, you can hear them called date candies or date rolls or date confections. And desiccated coconut is very important. And if I show you the difference between sort of desiccated coconut and unsweetened coconut, this is unsweetened coconut, which is very, very large, long shreds, and they won't work. So if you just say unshredded coconut in a recipe when you're writing this and it flies under the radar, people will try and make this and they'll be rolling this in their kitchens just as I am now. And they'll have a great deal of difficulty. So that's just a little bit of the beyond the book.
So we've been working together now on both of your cookbooks since 2022, and I'm curious what your first thoughts were maybe when you saw that email, or when you first thought about what it would be like to create a book with us here at DK and Penguin Random House.
I never set out to be an author. I always wanted to be an entertainer. And in many ways, I had expected that to be in the realm of music and jazz. One day was checking my inbox, and I saw you, an editor, at DK, Penguin Random House, reach out to me asking about, a book. I was like, oh my goodness. At first I was like, I'm no author. That's I yell at a camera for a living. How is that going to translate? But then I mulled over it for, a day. And I was like, okay, here are people online who are wanting to support me in different ways. They're wanting to consume the content that I do in different ways. They love these old recipes, and sometimes they comment and they say, I feverishly try and write down the recipes that you yell out on camera. Have you ever thought about having a book? And yeah, the rest is history, as you've said.
So Dylan, I'd love for you to show us all what you've been working on as we've been talking. I know those nuggets are almost done now, so could you give us a look and tell us a little bit more about them?
Dates and nuts rolled up together with some coconut create a very malleable, sort of ductile, great for candies and confections. So then you chop that up, you roll it in desiccated coconut, and you add a little, either a whole blanched almond or a slivered almond on top. And you get these wonderful little nuggets right here. And, you know, you can package them up. You can give them for Christmas as gifts. And my hands look all sticky and covered in coconut. I work with my hands. I'm not afraid of it. I've got a dirty kitchen. That's because I use it. But these are wonderful little confections. And you just, take a bite of it. Or the whole one. And it's sweet. And it's full of dates.
It looks like a very bite-sized morsel, that you can just pop right into your mouth.
Exactly. I love it.
Thank you so much for joining us in this episode of Beyond the Book with Publishers Weekly. Dylan and I are so excited to be able to talk about Baking Across America with you, and are so excited that it's being published on May 20th and will be available everywhere books are sold. If you haven't, you can check out Dylan's book tour too to see if he's coming to a location near you, as he is going all across the United States again. And so great to talk with you as always.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you, everybody.